Hey, noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we're going to jump right into Joe Rogan Experience 2136, apparently. And it's the one episode where we had Joe Rogan interview both Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble. And since recently I've been sharing my thoughts and opinions when it comes to Lex Fridman's interviews with, oh, that's me responding to my what happened. Dunking, you're funny. I love your thumbnails, man. Probably react to your reaction to me as well one of these days, but that is an awesome he's cool. The dunking is really cool. That was a little bit of an unplanned reaction right there. Anyways, I've been speaking about Graham Hancock a lot, and this is something that I've been pointing towards that you know once wanted me to react to, so let's go.
All right. Well, this took a lot of time to organize, but I'm very excited, and I'm happy you're both here. Thank you. Flint, please introduce yourself to everybody, what you do. And
Yeah, hi, my name is Flint, and I'm an archaeologist.
I love the irony that an archaeologist's name is Flint. Like, it's perfect.
done archaeology my whole life. My dad was an archaeologist, and I'm just very passionate about sharing archaeology and what we do. I find in general that people don't really understand what modern archaeology is about, and so I'm going to try to get that across while here. You know, that's my goal.
fantastic.
I love that it looks the part. Even the hat is very Indiana Jones reminiscent. That the beard is very historically accurate. I've got to say, this is exactly what I think an archaeologist should look like. So I appreciate that. Flint, can I call you Flint, or do you go by Flintstone?
Fantastic. Take that microphone and try to keep it about a fist from your face.
1 second. We have to. His HDMI is not working. It's not going through. I thought
Mine
it was
is not?
Okay. All right. We had a bit of a technical issue, but we're up. So, Flint, you were just explaining how your passion is archaeologist. You're an archaeologist, and you have this opportunity to sort of educate people on how archaeology is done.
Yeah, that's my goal, is to try to share what we do, why we do it, and what our goals are with it. Yeah.
Okay.
If anyone is here for the first time, I'm very neutral, okay? So I'm not a hater of Graham Hancock, and I'm not a believer either. And so at the same level, I'm interested here. I'm just coming here, no horse in the race, just trying to be fair, listen to both and see if I may agree sometimes, disagree with the other, that sort of situation. There's no hate, no toxicity, no vitriol, nothing, just so we know.
Terrific. And Graham, everybody knows you. You've been on this podcast about 10 times.
Largely thanks to you, Joe.
Oh, I'm very happy. Happy to introduce the world to it. Are we okay, Flint, with the HDMI?
I think we've been doing shows together since 2011.
You, I think, were one of my first real guests. You might be the first real guest. Because before that, it was just my friends, just comedians.
Yeah.
And it was all in my house, and we ate pizza, and it was fantastic. Jamie's setting everything up, making sure we're good to go. Okay. The way we'd agreed to do this is, Flint, you wanted to open, and you wanted to do about 10 minutes and just sort of explain things.
Yeah.
And so we'll let you do that, and then, Graham,
Good.
you'll have an opportunity to respond. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm all for, I really like the setup, by the way, because I'm all for discussion, discourse, freedom of expression. So I'm really looking forward to see how they go at each other.
Yeah, thank you. Jamie, do you mind pulling up my screen?
Da-dum.
Here we go.
All right, so look, one of the things that I see when I'm online...
And I'm going to have to blur half this video then. Because, I mean, YouTube is going to demonetize that right away.
or in person sharing archaeology, is I find it's tough to get across what it is. And so I wanted to start with a fun example. Okay. So I understand that maybe not everybody can see the screen. So Joe, do you mind actually just kind of describing what this artifact is?
Oh, you're putting this on me, buddy.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this says Athenian red figure from 470 BC. And it is two people having sex. It's a man on top of a woman. You see his penis. You see it's it's very graphic.
It is very graphic. So what do you think this shares about what archaeology is? Any ideas?
Well, I mean, you're finding artwork and parts of civilization that were left behind and, have been around, in this case, since over 2,000 years.
Yeah, and for a long time, scholars thought that a piece like this described sort of life in Athens. And they
Oh, I see where he's going with this. He's saying I want to say temporal or spatial placement, but also archaeology in combination with anthropology. Probably that's where he's going, like the real purpose of why something is made.
connected to Athenian texts, sort of like Plato describing people having sex even, right? And on the other hand, however, every single piece of Athenian artwork with graphic sex like this, couples actually with penises and stuff like that, ends up in Italy. It's part of an Athenian...
Hey, Italians we like what we like.
Pornographic export market. And Kathleen Lynch and Sean Lewis and others have published on this. And so the real point is that what we're looking at is the painters are designing something for consumers in Italy. And
based on demand.
Particularly in Etruria. And this instead fits better in with telling us about life in Etruscans and the kind of...
Yeah, those Etruscans.
Stuff that they show in their tombs, sort of romance between people, or the kind of sexual scenes that they designed themselves in Italy as well. And the whole point here is that archaeology is not really about an artifact, it's not about a monument, it's about our patterns. And so when we sort of look at how much archaeology there is in the world, this is a map that shows the Horn of Africa.
I would even say interdisciplinary recognition of patterns, or pattern recognition, is a good way to look at it, because of course when you look at a piece of art, the archaeology is one type, one approach, then anthropology, language, if there is you need linguists, if there is something written in a special way, and that's how you pinpoint three-dimensionally a piece of work in an interpretative fashion that will actually help you understand that place within that culture. Okay, so that's the Horn of Africa. For those of you who have problems with geography, I always like to kind of help a little bit. Horn of Africa is imagine Africa as the continent, and then the eastern, this is on the east, kind of middle, and it's that part that, yeah, it looks like a horn, or maybe I would say the hammer of a pistol, personally, but yeah.
With every single archaeological site that's been surveyed there, and there's 171,000 of them.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It just looks amazing.
It's just, and this is just because of the terrain. Many of these are tombs, for example, Islamic and pre-Islamic tombs, and so they're visible on the surface. And so in many ways, when we think about archaeology today in the 21st century, we're thinking about big data sets and trying to analyze them statistically and understand the kind of patterns they put together.
Yeah, with all the different types of technologies that now we have, because of course archaeology, I think the point he's drawing here is that there is a fundamental difference between the way archaeology is approached now as opposed to how it was approached in the 1800s. Perhaps he's going to go there. Until 2018 record 61,480 structures of both known and new sites using both LiDAR and surface survey. Yeah, I think it's going to go into the tech. So far, presentation is good, apart from the fact that I have to blur everything in post-production.
And we use innovative technology, sort of LiDAR, lasers from the sky to see these things underground. For example, here are this publication by Canuto in 2018 records 61,480 structures still to be excavated, found with LiDAR and surface survey. Right? And so at the same time...
This is for people listening, it says ancient lowland Maya complex as revealed by airborne laser scanning of northern Guatemala. That's amazing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we have this huge data set, and with it we get high resolution. For example, the bottom image in red, it shows looters' trenches, because while there's a lot of archaeology, because people have been everywhere, it's very fragile and it's at risk, and that's something I also want to take some time to get across a bit while I'm here. And my own research is very much big data oriented too. I've studied nearly 1 million animal bones and teeth and horn fragments from
Holy moly.
ancient Greece, like this pile here from the island of Crete.
Man, that HDMI is not having any of this. Like, you can have all the PhDs you want, but if you don't have a right HDMI, yeah, good luck with that.
From Azoria. And in particular, I also want to get across the kind of precision we have. Right now, I do what's called isotope analysis. I look at oxygen and carbon isotopes in the teeth of these animals. And by taking multiple samples on different parts of the teeth, you can see the different areas that I've drilled on that tooth on the right? And what that does is it lets me understand the diet of the animal and where it's moving in the landscape seasonally. So in different seasons of the year, I can understand the kind of ways that people are raising animals. We can do this with human remains too. And
This is fascinating. Isotope analysis is in fact the basis of a lot of disciplines. Not the basis, but it does intertwine with lots of different disciplines. So it is obviously used in archaeology, as he's explaining, is used in anthropology, biology, forensic science, ecology. Isotope analysis is a very multidisciplinary element, which kind of connects to what I was saying earlier on. And now he's given this very interesting thing, studying the climate and diets of individuals and animals.
We can get this high level of resolution and precision that people don't always realize that we have, right? And so in this case, I'm here to try to discuss with Graham and to test his lost civilization hypothesis.
I appreciate that. Discuss rather than shame is, to me, the best way to approach any hypothesis.
He has this, he's written about it, many books, and he's given many talks here and on Netflix, and he's talked about this idea of a lost advanced civilization from the Ice Age, an advanced civilization that's around the globe, right?
Which is a fascinating thought, whether you believe it or not. I'm open to the possibility. I have disagreed with a few things with Mr. Hancock, for instance, this idea that pyramids were built there for a purpose, in the sense that they were built in a certain way to invite us in the present to discover them. All of that, I don't believe it. I do believe that there was a catastrophic event, possibly some sort of civilization ending event. I am strongly inclined to believe that, as I mentioned on other videos of mine, simply because it appears to be somewhere allocated or stored in our collective memory as a species when you look at all sorts of different civilizations and their mythology, their religion, their cultures. We often speak about this devastating event. Once again, I'll put a couple of links in the description if you want, but even the Sodom and Gomorrah discussion in the Bible. I don't believe it's only to be seen as religious, but I think there might be a connection to something that actually happened and that people have found a way to pass it on that was cultural in a way, rather than, of course, scientific. With that being said, when it comes to the actual Ice Age civilization, I've only watched a few videos. I haven't read his book, which is why I say, well, I'm open to the possibility, but if he's starting to bring in aliens, then it's one of those things where I can't say no for sure, but I'm going to have to need evidence with it. But today I'm interested in seeing this to give me a basis so that then I can go watch the Netflix series. That's why I'm doing this today.
Right? And in particular, he thinks there was a global cataclysm at that time, and the survivors introduced agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and arts to hunter-gatherers. And so I'm trying to tackle this with an open mind.
I really appreciate that. I like how he's approaching this. Also, we'll have to see how Mr. Hancock reacts to this framing of the argument, because something that can happen oftentimes during debates is that one of the two debaters will, willfully or inadvertently, misquote or misframe, incorrectly frame the other person's point. And it is extremely important to reframe your positions correctly before you start defending them, otherwise you'll end up fighting a straw man. I'm not saying this is what he's doing, but I am taking this other moment with a sort of pinch of salt, if you will, until Mr. Hancock confirms that that is exactly what he's stating, and then we'll see how he defends it.
And I want to tackle this with the perspective of my own experience and my own expertise. And so in that sense, if you think about what Carl Sagan says, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Graham is in many ways the first person to admit that the evidence he has is fingerprints. It's kind of what he thinks is this technological transmission to hunter-gatherers, but he does not have any direct dated evidence of this civilization. It's, after all, a lost civilization, right?
You know, I see here an opportunity to sort of discuss something, a little bit of food for thought. A lot of people repeat this sentence by Carl Sagan because it sounds cool. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I repeated it a couple of times, so not that much, a few years ago as well, and then I kind of stopped using it because I started thinking about it, that do extraordinary claims actually require extraordinary evidence? And the reality of fact is, if you really stop to think about it, which is what I'm going to present to you now, and then you tell me what you think, maybe not. They just, extraordinary claims require evidence. Why does the evidence need to be extraordinary to match up the claim? It's kind of strange, isn't it? Like, we repeat it because it sounds good, and everybody's like, oh, yeah, extraordinary. But does it? Let's try and map this for a second, because I think it's an interesting thought exercise. What do we mean by extraordinary? So we know what a claim is. I would say an extraordinary claim would be a claim that is very unlikely, given the current data set available, since we are discussing data analysis here. So, to put it into a frame of reference that we are used to, let's try and make a regular claim when it comes to the Roman Empire, a claim that isn't extraordinary. The Romans had access to metal and could manufacture all sorts of different types of metal. Now, this is a claim, Can we back it up with evidence? I want to say yes. If we couldn't find any sign of metallurgy in ancient Rome, and we couldn't find anything when it comes to the material goods, then we could say, no, we don't have the evidence required to confirm this claim. Hence, the claim is either wrong, or we just couldn't find the material goods that could prove it. Let's say instead that, as is the case, we find that not only they mention it, we have a lot of iconographic and literary evidence, but also we've got the material goods. We find orichalcum, we find brass, copper, low carbon steel, iron, arsenical bronze, tin bronze. Yes, the Romans were a metallurgically capable civilization, and they could work with lots of different types of metal. The claim has been proven by the evidence. So what is an extraordinary claim? The ancient Romans could work and produce titanium. Okay, I would say that is an extraordinary claim because it's very unlikely, considering the fact that titanium was only discovered, should we say, a couple of 100 years ago, roughly speaking. So it would be an extraordinary claim. But does it require extraordinary evidence? If, contrary to any expectation, at one point we find a shipwreck, and inside this Roman shipwreck, which we date to the 2nd century AD, we do find a titanium blade. It's evidence. It would blow our mind. Is that what makes it extraordinary? We weren't planning on finding that evidence. It is a little bit of a counterintuitive way to look at things, because really, I believe it becomes subjective where we draw the line, because now I kind of gave you an incredible statement. Titanium in ancient Rome would be a big deal. But where do you draw the line? I would personally say all claims require evidence. But of course, let me know what you think.
And so what I've been thinking through is, how can my own experience and expertise kind of test this hypothesis in a fair way? That's kind of my goal here.
Fair.
Here. And so I'm here doing a lot of research. I'm here to present what I see are two clear disproofs of a lost advanced Ice Age civilization. And archaeologists were fairly sure this does not exist. We've been looking for this kind of civilization for several hundred years. This idea of a pre-flood civilization has been around for several hundred years. And so what I want to do is focus on where my own experience and expertise is. My dad was an Ice Age archaeologist. He studied Neanderthal caves. Wow. And so I want to dig into some of the stuff that he's excavated and surveyed. These are, for example, 100,000-year-old stone tools from Egypt. And so we have just so much Ice Age evidence, and Graham usually ignores it, and he claims that his civilization...
Do you have your notifications on or something?
No, I don't know what that is.
The dongle is doing...
That's the HDMI. That's the HDMI cable connecting and disconnecting. I think they should get a new cable.
Sorry.
Yeah. If you hit mute, maybe it might stop.
Yeah, I just muted it.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
And so...
your claim was that Graham ignores this?
My claim is that he ignores most of the evidence for hunter-gatherers in the Ice Age, which is...
that he ignores it, or that he doesn't focus on it as much as he's focused on...
I would ask Graham that, but I understand they are giving him 10 minutes each.
Ancient advanced civilization.
I think that's one and the same. I think if you're going to look at the Ice Age, we need to look at the totality of evidence to understand what's there. And so, for example, he proposes the reason why the Ice Age civilization isn't there is because it's underwater. It's been, we've had 200 feet of sea level rise since the Younger Dryas, and therefore it's not accessible. And so I really want to focus on Ice Age coastlines, evidence from Ice Age coastlines and excavations, underwater evidence from the Ice Age, things like that. These areas where he says that archaeologists don't look, but we are looking, and what we find is the ephemeral traces of hunter-gatherers, rather than some sort of advanced civilization. And so that's one thing I want to show. I want to share this kind of evidence. Some of it's new, some of it's not, but I think it's the kind of thing that has a direct bearing on looking for such an Ice Age civilization.
When you're studying these coastal areas where these Ice Age people lived, and you're studying these underwater what would you call them? Are they cities? Are they towns? Are they villages?
No, these are. So in this case, this is a really brand new find from like a month ago. It's actually a hunting wall off the coast of Germany.
So it's where they have their camp?
Yeah, or maybe just where they drove game along to hunt them. But most of what's underwater are lithic scatters of stone tools. Stuff
very interesting.
Like this.
What do you have there?
I have a series of different stone tools. I'll
show
them off a little later.
Let me touch one of them.
Yeah, sure.
How old is
it? Yeah, honestly, I would do that too. How old is it?
These are all modern replicas made by archaeologists. Some of them made by my dad, and some.
Yeah, it would have been nice if it was like a real. Oh yeah, that's from 100,000. It's worth. It's worth like.
Have been made
I thought you could hook us up with some real stuff.
Sorry, no, I can't bring real stuff.
I have a real arrowhead. It's from here.
I do have an ancient corn cob right here. From about 1,200 years ago from the Southern Methodist University Archaeology Collection, and I'll explain why this is here in a bit.
Mesoamerican, I imagine.
But my question for you, though, was how much of the ground do you think has actually been studied? When you're looking at these ancient...
That is actually a very good question, because I think the amount of area that needs to be covered is monumental. There is definitely a lot that hasn't been mapped, covered, excavated, and this has to do sometimes with budget. Not necessarily because we don't think that there is going to, or they don't think that there is going to be something underneath a certain area, but simply because perhaps the government of the local area doesn't have any economic interest in it.
Ice Age Neanderthal populations, or were they Homo sapiens as well?
These are Homo sapiens. This is from, right at the end of the Ice Age. So this is modern humans, yeah.
So these, when you're finding remnants of ancient hunter-gatherers, how much of the ground do you think you've studied?
We've definitely not studied most of the ground, but as I'll show, we've studied a lot, and we actually put together predictive models on how to find this stuff. And so because it's really expensive to go diving, right?
There we go.
How many dives do you think have been done? Like how many times?
Thousands.
Thousands?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And lots of different sites have been found from all over the world.
And specifically, it was done to try to locate these...
To try to locate Stone Age, Ice Age stuff, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then my second thing I'd like to focus on is food. I am an archaeologist who studies ancient food. I'm an environmental archaeologist. I've studied millions of animal bones from the past. I've helped collect thousands and thousands of seeds like these, and it's something that people don't realize we can get. We've developed sampling methods, and we now at this point have millions of archaeobotanical remains, so seeds.
Seeds are very important, in fact, and it kind of connects to my recent video that I made. If you haven't checked it, I'll put a link in the description, and I'll show the thumbnail on screen, because there was, for example, when it comes to the shipwreck of the Pozzino, which is in Tuscany, Italy, and they found this ancient Roman shipwreck with a ship that contained some tablets made of wax, inside of which you had certain medicaments that were used by ancient Roman doctors. And some people said incorrectly, in fact, it's a debunking video, the one that I am suggesting you to check out from the channel. Some people incorrectly saying that these tablets also contained sunflower seeds, which would have been a proof, or an archaeological proof or evidence of a contact between ancient Rome and America, since sunflowers, of course, are a type of American flower or plant. But the reality of fact is that there were no seeds. There was only DNA, which is a massive difference. And then the DNA was explained as posthumous contamination due to the fact that this diving gear and equipment used by some of these divers had been stored near a sunflower seed field. All the details in the description. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is because if seeds had been found, we would be having now a completely different discussion. Seeds can be transported easily from place to place.
At this point have millions of archaeobotanical remains, so seeds from ancient civilizations and ancient societies all over the world. And I want to sort of show you how we understand domestication as a process. And we can see where it happened in real time, in real space, the sort of evolution from a wild plant to a domestic plant, because that counters Graham's idea that the civilization introduced agriculture. It was not an introduction. It's something that happened in a real space, and we'll track.
Right, so he's basically the archaeologist counter-argument is that it's not received knowledge, but it occurs spontaneously, just as an evolutionary trait of a civilization within their path. That's interesting.
How we can see humans taking control of the reproductive life cycle of these plants is what I want to show you.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah, of course.
Is that in a particular region? Like right now on Earth, there are people that are living in essentially a Stone Age manner, right?
I wouldn't call it a Stone Age manner,
well, okay,
no.
let's say people in uncontacted indigenous tribes in the Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they essentially are living...
Also, Stone Age, I think the reason why Mr. Flint now sort of opposed the classification as Stone Age is because the Neolithic is part of the Stone Age, but it is characterized by agriculture. So maybe what Joe Rogan meant is as hunter-gatherers.
with animal skins and bows and arrows, and they're living very similar to the way people lived 10,000 years ago.
I think there's plenty of people living today in their traditional lifestyles,
Right, but then there's also people that live in Tokyo.
Of course.
Right? So the world is huge. So if you find evidence of agriculture that dates back to a specific period where you can see the wild plants, and you can see this transition into domesticated plants, is it possible that we're dealing with a region? And I think part of the theory about the Younger Dryas impact theory was that although it probably devastated the entire human race, it didn't impact all the places the same way. Just like like right now, if a volcano goes off in Iceland, we don't even notice it, right? But over there, it's devastating.
Yes, but in this case, what I'm thinking about is, unlike, I know you guys have mentioned at times you can't radiocarbon date stone. We can date these seeds. So we can date that transition from domestic to, or from wild to domestic.
And what are the oldest seeds that you found?
Oh, the oldest seeds we have go back tens of thousands of years. The oldest domesticated crops we have go back. Fertile Crescent area, yeah.
Does not surprise me that these are from the Fertile Crescent.
Is it possible that there was domestication before that in other parts?
The $1 million question.
Parts of the world?
I'm going to show you why that's not possible.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's kind of my goal there.
Okay.
Yeah, because, and it's not even that, it's not even a disproof of an advanced civilization. It's a disproof of agriculture, period, in the Ice Age. There's a lot of reasons why there was no agriculture, and so I want to get into the depths, the weeds on that. Let's say. Yeah.
Okay.
I wonder if he's going to mention climate.
So just to kind of go off, I also want to explain.
More penises.
I know, man.
Flint, what are you doing to us here?
Hey, you got to get the audience somehow,
These are
right?
penis pipes? Is that a pipe?
Yeah, they are.
That's a rough,
not pipe. It's a lamp.
Pull.
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, a lamp.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so archaeology.
Those are cool.
I think archaeology should be open. But of course, in the 20th century, the mores of certain Italian museums, like here in Naples, they kept this stuff hidden.
So did they hide this just because of the graphic nature of it?
Yeah, but it's now open. For the last 20 years, if you go to the museum in Naples, they have what's called the Gabinetto Segreto, and it has all
Gabinetto Segreto, yeah, that's well.
All the erotic art from Pompeii and Herculaneum and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be secret. It should just be age appropriate. So if something is not age appropriate, you don't let kids in. That's the only thing I would say. But for adults who are interested in the archaeological aspect of it, I think it should be absolutely open there for study. It's great at an anthropological level, cultural level, understanding what sort of approaches to sexuality and its representation. Is this going to get my video yellow $1 sign now?
And archaeologists, look, we're underfunded. We're not perfect, but our goal, most of us, is to publish everything open data. And we have at this point millions upon millions of archaeological records available from things like Open Context, the Archaeology Data Service, the Digital Archaeological Record, even the Radiocarbon Paleolithic Europe database. So when you're talking about the Ice Age, we have radiocarbon dates directly dated from 13,000 sites in Europe and Siberia. We have quite a bit of evidence of this ephemeral evidence for hunter-gatherers, if you see what I mean. And so the evidence is just enormous, this database for hunter-gatherers. And so I think it's important that we deal with the existing evidence and see where it leads us, if you see what I mean.
And what is the oldest evidence for hunter-gatherers, just for the audience?
Oh, God, I mean, that goes back, a million years or something, pre-Homo sapiens.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
makes sense.
So, but in terms of what we would consider Stone Age man, or early Homo sapien, what is like the earliest buildings that we know of? What's the earliest tools that we know of? What do we have?
The earliest tools we know of are many hundreds of thousands of years, right? Before modern
similar
Homo
to
sapiens.
the ones you just showed us.
Yeah, well, they're bigger. They're probably, this isn't quite it either. This is a Middle Paleolithic style core that my dad made. But the earliest stone tools are quite large, many of them. But as time goes on, they become smaller and smaller because humans become more efficient at using
more refined, also your generational knowledge.
This raw material, right? Because there's only a few different kinds of stones that you can nap. That's what's called a conchoidal fracture. I'll pass some of these around at some point. We'll do a show and tell, and I'll show you how we can tell the difference between kind of a man-made stone tool versus just a piece of shatter.
I actually just watched a documentary on it, or a YouTube video, I should say, and it was really fascinating watching them nap them.
Yeah, exactly.
How they do it with like a piece of leather on their leg, and they knock the top of it. It's very interesting.
You even have some lovely deer antler that could be used for that, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
For the precise napping at the end, yes. First you use the stone, and then you use that one for the chipping at the end.
Yeah.
Okay,
Make
so
it
continue.
serrated.
So you were saying that we have a very clear chain. Essentially, you're saying there's a clear chain between what we know of in terms of like hunter-gatherers and then more modern civilizations. It's a pretty linear line.
No, I don't see it as a linear line. I actually
not
think,
linear. That's a bad. But that you know at what point in time it started, I should say.
I think what we can say is we can start pinpointing the starts of domestication and things like that. But I think that what this big data set that we now have shows is there is no linear trajectory to human culture. It's actually very heterogeneous what happens. It's different in different areas of the world, and therefore we need to
Of course, because it's very related to the local environment.
Understand the local context to understand them. And that's really what it's picturing. I mean, in many ways, like, I think Graham's TV show is fun and interesting TV, but I think it misrepresents what we think of as the birth of civilization. We don't really write or teach about that anymore. It's very different in different places. Even the very term civilization is something that everybody has a different definition for, so we almost never use it. I never use the term civilization while teaching or writing.
That's okay. It's a personal choice. I don't see anything wrong, though, with using the term civilization, because even though there might be different definitions, then I think at that point the solution would be to create a uniform definition, at least linguistically speaking, in order to facilitate the exchange of information. Civilization is something that in general, though, I do not think it's that strange of a term. So I don't know why he's presenting this, perhaps trying to say that Mr. Hancock is not updated to what academia now uses as terminology, because I've heard quite a lot of professors use the term civilization, maybe not in the field of archaeology, but definitely in the field of history. A little bit of a moot point there.
For example, it's a term that you can use to mean anything. And so it's like this grand narrative approach to human prehistory is something that's from the 20th century and not really a component of 21st century archaeology, is what I would say.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And so I just want to end with a couple questions for Graham, if he's willing. At different times, he's described that civilization that he's looking for from 12,000 years ago, it was advanced as, say, our own civilization in the late 18th or early 19th century.
That is a very strong statement, of course. Maybe, absolutely something we could define as extraordinary at this point, just to connect it to what we were saying before. 18th or 19th century, but in the Ice Age. Yeah, I find it difficult to believe, but it is fascinating, so I wouldn't try to shut him down or anything. That's not me. I think anyone. It's an interesting claim. He writes books on it, so there is a monetary interest for him. With that being said, I love to dive into this type of thing, and I'm always open-minded to see, okay, so what does he base it on? So let's see how he's going to defend it.
And so, as an archaeologist, we study technology, we study the material remains of the past. And so I wonder what we're trying to look for, right? And so I know that this is kind of how the last conversation with Michael Shermer started. And so I get that, but I do want to just quickly say Graham has acknowledged that there's a good chance there's no metallurgy, for example, with this civilization. He said maybe a decision was made not to use metals. And I'd say we could definitively prove there was no large-scale metallurgy in the Ice Age. If you look at ice cores in the Arctic, right? We can track metallurgy of the Roman period, of medieval periods, based on lead emissions that end up in these ice cores. And there are no emissions from metallurgy in the Ice Age.
Okay, so this presents a very interesting paradigm of discussion. Does an advanced civilization all the way up to 18th and 19th century, it's very, very advanced, can they reach that level of advancement without using metal? What would you need? Like an alternative medium? Would they have to discover plastic, for instance, or have access to a different type of alloy altogether that doesn't involve, well, if it's an alloy though, I mean, why would they keep it stone and wood? That's very difficult to defend, which is why I'm looking forward to hear what Hancock says.
So we can be sure that there's no global metallurgical civilization that's doing a lot of mining and smelting. Certainly they're not burning fossil fuels like they might be in the 18th or 19th century. So we know that could not have been around that early because it would show up in the atmosphere. Likewise, we can think about shipwrecks, right? Graham has mentioned that the bulk of marine archaeology has focused on shipwrecks and not the continental shelves. And so the thing is, at this point, we have something like 3 million shipwrecks from around the world. And so
this is the part that then Mr. Hancock said that he wasn't prepared for this. And so when he heard this statement, I remember, just to give context for those of you who haven't been watching the other episode, Mr. Hancock posthumously said that Mr. Flint's here, his statement that they have mapped 3 million shipwrecks, it was in fact incorrect, in the sense that the number that have been mapped is a lot smaller, maybe a few 100,000, not 3 million. So is this a point that should be disregarded? Maybe not in its entirety, but it's part of the context. We'll probably have to kind of watch directly how Hancock's answers to this on his own dedicated video to have a complete picture.
One of my questions for Graham is, if this is a global civilization with ships, why is it that we don't have shipwrecks from this global civilization? I see this as a big, big problem. If we're looking for a civilization that's traversing the oceans, we should find these shipwrecks. And similarly, these shipwrecks are located near the coast. They're located on the submerged continental shelves. We are actually exploring these submerged continental shelves in detail. We're able to find scattered ephemeral shipwrecks, but not monuments of some sort of civilization.
And the shipwrecks, what's the oldest one that we've found so far?
Well, there was one that was just published from about, I think it was about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago off the coast of Italy that I saw. Something around there would say what I'd say is around the oldest that we have, yeah.
And at what point in time these are mostly wooden boats?
Yeah, these are mostly wooden boats, yeah.
At what point in time would they deteriorate completely?
Yeah, that's a situation. Underwater, as I've mentioned already a few times, when you have the correct anaerobic conditions, actually wood preserves much better, believe it or not, particularly when it's covered in layers of material. So, but then again, of course, we're still working with organic materials, which is part of the problem. But I think underwater, believe it or not, what's better than that? Ice?
Well, so actually underwater environments are really good for the preservation of organic remains, which is why we actually get wood in waterlogged environments rather than on land, for example. Mm-hmm. You either need to be in a really dry environment for wood to preserve, or a really wet environment, or with those seeds I was showing, it needs to be charred. So in general, wood will decay. So, in a lot of underwater environments, it'll just preserve as long as it's in homeostasis.
Which is why that explorer's boat that sank, that hit, whose boat was that?
Since they didn't specify this, I'd like to do that for the audience right now. When he says homeostasis, he's talking about a body's ability to maintain an internal environment that is stable regardless of changes in the external conditions. I think that's what he's referring to.
That? Do you know the boat I'm talking about?
I don't know.
Famous explorer is this beautiful wooden boat that's almost completely intact at the bottom of the ocean.
Uh-huh.
I think it hit an iceberg.
Yeah.
And which explorer was that, Jamie? Do you remember that dude? There's an amazing video of it. It's amazing. Like they're just zooming in on this boat, and it just looks almost exactly like it looked when it sank because the water's freezing cold. That's it right there. Look at that. Ernest Shackleton.
Oh, yeah, okay. I have seen this, yeah.
It's incredible. Like the whole boat, just imagine what it would have been to have been on that boat back then.
And I mean, the preservation underwater is amazing. There's this shipwreck off the coast of Italy that I just presented what was on the Bad Boy of Science YouTube about shipwrecks and stuff. And there's still the vine netting that was holding the Roman cargo was still preserved.
Wow.
And so the just underwater preservation is just freaky.
And is it would it stay that way for 20,000 years, you think?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There's this idea that things just decay the older they are, and that's really not true. It depends on the burial environment that they're in. So taphonomy is what archaeologists use to study how things survive and how they are there.
I've actually talked about taphonomy on my video about Pompeii when I was reacting to the very capable historian at was it History Hit? I think it was History Hit. So you'll find a link in the description if you're interested.
So typically when things are buried, they're very stable. Or when they're, sitting, it depends on where you are on the bottom of the ocean. But typically it's very, very stable. In fact, the worst place to be is the tidal zone. So when sea level rise is very slow and an area is stuck in that tidal zone, things will get battered. But if things are deeply deposited quickly or sea level rise is very quick, that actually helps preserve stuff. And so that's how we can still find these kind of shipwrecks and ice age sites and other sort of settlements underwater.
Now, what about the shifting of sediment at the bottom of the ocean when you're dealing with things like 10, 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago?
Yeah, so there's actually, I was just talking with Jessica Cook-Hale out of Bradford about this. And actually, so she's done some studies off the coast of Florida of sort of hurricanes that are coming in today because she's excavating Stone Age shell mounds there. And it turns out, actually, that the hurricanes coming in today really don't disturb them much at all. Yeah, she's published on that. So obviously it's going to...
So it's mostly surface?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the
water.
specific environment is the answer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So certain environments, it's not going to preserve. Others, it will. Yeah, it's variable is the reality of it.
Was there any other questions for Graham?
Wait a second. I just wanted to end by saying, look, archaeologists, what we find is what we publish, right? We are not trying to keep stuff hidden. If I found Atlantis, I would publish Atlantis. Klaus...
I think he's saying this because I believe, correct me if you have been following Hancock for a long time, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that one of the positions that Hancock was presenting when it comes to modern archaeology was the idea that they were indeed trying to hide evidence that would sort of debunk whatever it is that they are presenting or considered to be within their consensus the conventional teaching of the past.
Schmidt found Göbekli Tepe. He published Göbekli Tepe. And so I think that that's really important. We want to change and rewrite history. That's how we make a name for ourselves. Every article I have published and most of my colleagues have published is something that is adding and changing our picture of the past.
When it comes to rewriting of history, I've made recently a dedicated video, believe it or not. I'm not trying to plug, but they really do make sense. There are two different ways of rewriting history. The legitimate one, which is based on new evidence, also due to new technology, new pathways of understanding, new patterns that allow us to actually rewrite history because now we have evidence that shows us what the truth is. And then you have the political rewriting of history, which we could consider to be historical revisionism, which instead is not based on the truth, but is based on what's more advantageous for the powers at hand. And to be honest, the second one is horrible, but the first one, there is nothing wrong with it.
We're not locked in on a specific narrative. What we're trying to do is update the picture of the past for each other, for our colleagues, and for people all around the world to sort of give a sense of, human culture and the diversity of it, the resilience of it, and how we've survived this long so that we can learn from it.
Right.
Okay. Graham.
Let's go, Graham.
Flint, first of all, thank you for joining me here.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for having me.
I like the approach already. Very civilized, very civil. Be nice to see more of this, even when people are intellectual opponents.
It's in a way a historic occasion, because as far as I know, this is the first time ever that a mainstream archaeologist has sat down in a public forum and debated somebody who's looking at the past from an alternative point of view.
Right.
And I'm grateful to you for sitting in the hot seat and doing that. I think it's really really valuable, and I hope the audience will find it useful. I'm going to try and recall a few of your questions. The lost civilization that I'm thinking of is like a black hole in space to me. It's like something missing in the story of our past. To the extent that I can put form on it, I think we're looking at a civilization, like all civilizations, that emerged out of shamanism. I believe that they did have rather advanced astronomy and a knowledge of the world, but I don't compare. When I speak of a 19th century level of technology, I'm talking specifically about knowledge of longitude. The longitude problem was not solved by our civilization until the middle of the 18th century.
It's good there is a reframing and making sure that we understand exactly what he means what he meant when he made that statement.
And I'm talking about knowledge of very hard to observe astronomical phenomena such as the precession of the equinoxes.
Okay, so he's not, just so I understand, for those of you who follow him, please help me understand this. He's not saying that this Ice Age civilization had trains and all of the clocks and mechanical machines then, as we did in the 19th century. That's what I'm trying to understand here.
That knowledge is normally attributed to the ancient Greeks, but I think there's compelling evidence that it's much earlier than that. I'm not quite sure where to start with my first presentation, but you're telling us that archaeology is very keen on new ideas and wants to really explore and investigate the past. Is that right?
That's my perspective. Yeah.
That's your perspective. All right. Let's have a look at Clovis first. Now, tell me what your view on the Clovis first thesis is.
Well, when I was an undergraduate student, I was taught that there were people here before Clovis, and that was over 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And so that would be what decade?
That would be the early 2000s.
the early 2000s. So would you feel that the whole Clovis first idea? Clovis first is the idea that, excuse me, it's a culture that archaeologists call the Clovis culture. The reason that they call it the Clovis culture is because its artifacts were first found in a place called Blackwater Draw, and nearby Blackwater Draw is the town of Clovis, New Mexico. So archaeologists named this culture the Clovis culture after that, and it was for a long while thought to be the first culture, the first human presence in the Americas. And the dating that was put on that was around 13,400 years ago. That this culture crossed the Bering Straits, which were then a land bridge, as you can see from this image on the screen. They crossed the Bering Straits, they entered into North America. They came down through, often it was argued, an ice-free corridor, although that's very debatable, and then they entered the main part of the Americas and gradually made their way further south. And this was a dominant paradigm until, I would say, the 1990s, when it began to be seriously questioned. But I would wonder whether the ghost of Clovis first is still not haunting archaeology. So let me just say a few words on this subject. So across the Bering Straits 13,400 years ago, there's a single common origin. Supposedly that was the idea with Clovis first. There have been recent genetic discoveries showing a very close relationship between Australasians and certain peoples of the Amazon rainforest. We've talked about this before on your show, Joe, and I can go into that in more detail later. A huge amount of evidence from South America has a bearing on this subject. This is the typical tool set that the Clovis people were thought to have used. Despite the fact that you're telling us that Clovis first has been debunked since the 1990s, really, and you were taught that it was debunked in the 2000s, we can find New Scientist publishing on this in 2013, questioning the Clovis first model. And those who did question the Clovis first model, I do love your picture of this free and open and generous archaeology, but actually archaeologists can be very, very mean to other...
Yeah, I don't know if I would use mean necessarily as a term. It doesn't matter. People are mean to me all the time. I just dismiss them and continue my path. But yeah, no, sure. In its original presentation, Mr. Flint demonstrated that he is an open-minded archaeologist who is willing to share. And I like him up to this point. But I can understand how Mr. Hancock, in his own experience, having been the target of quite a lot of personal attacks and ad hominem, then he says, well, yeah, it's nice that you're like that, but there are other people within the archaeology field that are not like you are describing, which, it's fair. At this point, he's speaking of his own experience.
There are archaeologists who disagree with them. And the example of this is Jacques Cinq-Mars, who investigated Bluefish Caves in the Yukon and found evidence of human beings there more than 20,000 years ago. Now, if that evidence were correct, it would blow the Clovis first model out of the water. Sure. People are suddenly in America more than 7,000 years before Clovis. The reaction to that was not welcoming. The reaction to that was fury at Jacques Cinq-Mars.
It should not be the case if it's presented with evidence. I think the only case in which you should have, I don't know if fury is ever, doesn't sound professional, of course, but I think, yeah, a certain level of, I did have disdain for the TikToker that was saying that the ancient Roman Empire didn't exist and then proceeded to provide evidence that was like complete nonsense. So yes, I did make fun of her points because it was nonsense. But I wouldn't cancel her, I wouldn't prevent her from speaking, and I wouldn't even prevent her from making books if she wants to. Freedom of speech is what I say to that. But I wouldn't be respectful of her positions because I would be like, it's complete, utter nonsense that the Roman Empire never existed. So it's a very case-by-case situation. I think both of them, in this case, I like them very much as speakers, but both of them are speaking in a little bit of absolute terms, whereas it really is a case-by-case. And there are situations in which I think you should be open-minded if the evidence is presented, even if it's challenging established ideas. In fact, because it's challenging established ideas, that's good that it's doing it. Let's review the evidence. However, there are sometimes some statements that are so stupid and baseless that I wouldn't fury against them, but I wouldn't give the argument any respect. So it really depends.
And here's the Smithsonian. Rather than launching a major new search for more early evidence, the find stirred fierce opposition and a bitter debate, one of the most acrimonious and unfruitful in all of science, noted the journal Nature.
Right.
And it was a brutal experience for Jacques Cinq-Mars. He likened it to the Spanish Inquisition. Audiences...
Which, I mean, it's a fair point. I do appreciate what he's trying to convey here, Mr. Hancock.
Paid little heed to his evidence at academic conferences. They gave short shrift to the evidence. Then his competence was questioned. When Jacques proposed that Bluefish Caves was 24,000 years old, it was not accepted, says William Josey. The fact is that Jacques Cinq-Mars was ruined by the archaeological reaction to his discovery. His career was wrecked. His research funding was withdrawn. He was ignored by colleagues in the halls of academia. He was insulted and humiliated. It destroyed his life. But he was right. And the fact that he was right was later confirmed.
I want to see how Mr. Flint reacts to this specifically.
It was confirmed that indeed human beings had been at Bluefish Caves, and there's the publication from 2017, I think. January 2017, confirming that all along Jacques Cinq-Mars had been right, and that the ruining and destruction of his reputation for saying something that other archaeologists disagreed with had been wholly unnecessary.
Well, yeah, okay. But basically what I would say to this is that by his introduction, Mr. Flint should agree with you when it comes to this. And I mean, at the end of the day, he is here. So I hope he doesn't stay too long, because I'm with Hancock when it comes to what he's saying now. I just hope he doesn't go too deeply into it out of frustration, because the other speaker, I think, agrees with him anyways. Agrees, I mean, with the idea of, yeah, let's sit down and talk without any ad hominem and destruction of reputation. That's why he's here. And so far he has been respectful.
And again, the Smithsonian, the study raises serious questions about the effect of the bitter, decades-long debate over the peopling of the New World. Did archaeologists in the mainstream marginalize dissenting voices on this key issue? And if so, what was the impact on North American archaeology? Did the intense criticism of pre-Clovis sites produce a chilling effect, stifling new ideas and hobbling the search for early early sites? So here's Clovis debunked. You're telling me that it was debunked in the 90s, Flint, but here's Clovis being debunked again in 2007, National Geographic. Here's Clovis being debunked in 2012. I mean, for a theory that was debunked in the 1990s, it's weird to see it still being debunked in 2012. It's like there's something still there to debunk, isn't there? Wikipedia entry. Recently, the scientific consensus has changed to acknowledge the presence of pre-Clovis cultures in the America, ending the Clovis first consensus. This was a piece from the 15th of April, 2023. My God, here's the big think, April 2022. Clovis apparently still needs to be debunked. It's like a zombie. It keeps on haunting archaeology, and people keep on having to debunk it.
Then it's like a ghost, technically.
And I'd like to just mention Tom Dillehay. Tom Dillehay excavated the site of Monteverde in Chile. And he found evidence that human beings had been there 14,000, maybe as much as 18,000 years ago in the deep south of South America. And again, the archaeology that Flint would like us to believe exists would have welcomed that find. But no, that find was not welcomed. That find was massively attacked, particularly by American archaeologists. We now know that Tom Dillehay has been vindicated, and that he was absolutely correct all along, that human beings were in Monteverde thousands of years before Clovis, he was eventually vindicated. Now, what I want to do, if you don't mind, is just play a tiny little clip from Tom Dillehay himself.
Please.
I don't have audio set up for you to do that.
Oh.
Can you send it to him?
I just have the HDMI cable.
Right, but if he sends it to you, can
isn't HDMI, I mean...
You do that?
Sure.
Okay.
How do I send it to you?
Can you
email? You have a Mac.
Email. Oh yeah, he does have a
pause.
Mac. Yeah.
After a slight technical hitch.
Okay, we're back.
After a slight technical hitch, let's play this clip from Tom Dillehay, who was the discoverer and excavator of Monteverde.
Okay.
I put together an interdisciplinary research team of people, got National Geographic funding and National Science Foundation funding. And that went pretty well the way we expected it to. And I found that the scientists were open-minded. This includes archaeologists. We had Australian, Chilean, and Argentinian archaeologists working with us. Cumulatively speaking, those people, besides myself, probably had close to 100 years of experience amongst them. What surprised me on the other side of the coin was the stiff closed-mindedness of many North American archaeologists. But some of the North American colleagues were very difficult to deal with, and I think at times presenting a very unhealthy atmosphere, cutting us off before we could present the data at meetings, not talking with us about it, refusing to even look at the data, this sort of thing.
So, I think I've got a few minutes left of my presentation time, and I would like to deal with the issue that Flint has mentioned of archaeology somehow knowing that there was no lost civilization.
There we go. There's a meat and bone.
If we could call this up on the screen, Jamie. So, the Society for American Archaeology, of which Flint is a member, wrote an open letter to Netflix shortly after the release of my show, Ancient Apocalypse, really asking Netflix to cancel the show. Not to cancel it, this is quite cleverly put. They said they said reclassify it as science fiction. Now, to my mind, what is the result of 30...
Then, to be fair, they would have to reclassify as science fiction the documentary on Cleopatra, if that's where they're going. But I think that's why Netflix refused, because then they would have to apply the law consistently upon all sorts of different shows. And so they decided not to do it, I guess.
Plus years of work on my part being reclassified as science fiction is as good as cancelling it. Netflix did not reclassify it as science fiction, but archaeology, the Society for American Archaeology, says that it really sees no evidence for an advanced lost civilization of the Ice Age, and that my series is simply entertainment with ideological goals. So I want to get into the parts of the world that archaeology has not looked at, that have been...
It's kind of interesting, though, from that statement, just the last thing, contrary to Hancock's claims, archaeology does not willfully ignore credible evidence, nor does it seek to suppress it in a conspiratorial fashion. But we just showed that.
Yeah, we just showed in the case of
Tom. Exactly. I think they just need to stop, whoever it is, they just need to stop to speak of archaeology as a whole. I do believe it's a person by person, and there might be a higher number of people that are closed-minded, but we also saw that it depends on the country. Not everything is America. I mean, I love America. That's where I live. I married an American. But I'm just saying America isn't the entire planet. So it is a very, very case-by-case, country-by-country, person-by-person, century-by-century sort of discussion, isn't it? So people saying, oh, archaeology does this, or archaeology doesn't do this. Yeah, but who makes more sense?
Dillehay, that his evidence was suppressed, that in the case of Jacques Cinq-Mars, his evidence was suppressed, that archaeology was not open-minded about the work of these guys, that they suffered humiliation and great difficulty in advancing their work. And furthermore, I'd like to make another point clear at this point, Flint. I don't think there's an archaeological conspiracy against me. I'm not so conceited. I don't imagine there's a conspiracy. I don't think archaeologists are sitting together in a cabal conspiring against me. I think that archaeology is...
Wouldn't it be great if now that drape fell and there are all the archaeologists sitting specifically there working against...
locked into a mindset about the past where my ideas simply seem preposterous. And I think it's very annoying to archaeology that those ideas have some resonance with the public. But I absolutely refute any suggestion that I have ever said that archaeology is involved in a conspiracy against me or is trying to suppress my work. That is not the case.
Okay.
Look, there's the Sahara Desert. A fair bit of archaeology has been done in the Sahara Desert, but we're looking at 9.2 million square kilometers of the Sahara Desert. Tell me how much of the Sahara you think has actually been excavated, Flint, by archaeologists?
I'd say a bunch of it has been surveyed, including by my dad.
No. How much has actually been excavated? What sort of percent?
Well, a lot of sort of desert archaeology does not have excavation. It's eroded away due to the wind.
Oh, so what's your answer to my question? How much is archaeology really know?
He's going a little... Anyways, let's see.
About the past of the Sahara.
Well, we understand about the domestication of pearl millet in the Sahara, from when the Sahara was much more, much of it was actually more habitable because it was not desert. So we can see the domestication of pearl.
Yeah, that's a very correct statement there.
Millet and sorghum.
No.
We can see
my
ice
question
age
is
sites
my
across
question
it.
is related specifically to my subject. Has enough of the Sahara been excavated for archaeology to exclude any possibility that they've missed anything important in the Sahara?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the answer to that is going to be no. But then again, the Mr. Flint did say that they don't excavate it.
We have found thousands of sites of ephemeral hunter-gatherer remains in the Sahara.
You're still not answering my question. How much of the Sahara has archaeology actually looked at?
I have no idea, but quite a bit, Graham.
What do you mean by quite a bit?
What I mean is that due to remote sensing, due to surface survey, and due to archaeological excavation, we actually have reasonable coverage across the Sahara. We understand that during green periods in the Neolithic, we can see agricultural villages, and before the Neolithic, we can find ephemeral hunter-gatherer camps where they were napping stones.
But the fact of the matter is, around about 1% of the Sahara has been excavated, and 99% hasn't. So to say that there's no possibility of any traces of a lost civilization in the Sahara seems to me a bit premature, particularly since during the African humid period, and there were several of them, the Sahara was green and fertile.
And we agree with that, of course, and he agrees with that too. So 1% only has been excavated, and yet Mr. Flint said quite a bit has been studied. I don't even think he used the term excavated. I think this might be a semantic problem. Do they mean the same thing? Let's see how he answers, because now they are giving us very, very different statements. So let's see how Mr. Flint reacts to Mr. Hancock's proposition here. Very interesting.
And was a very attractive environment in which to live. I might come on to the ancient maps issue, but there's an ancient map up there which shows a green and fertile Sahara, and oddly it coincides very much with a radar survey of the Sahara done in 2015, showing river channels in exactly the places shown in that ancient map. I think the Sahara is a fascinating, underserved area by archaeology. And the plain fact of the matter is it's very expensive to work there, it's very difficult to work there, and archaeology has done very little work in the Sahara. Not no work, but very little. Not enough to write off the possibility that evidence might be found in the future. You know, you're basing this on our technology now. Let's look 200 years in the future. Look how much archaeology has progressed in the last 50 years. 200 years in the future, the technologies might be so much more advanced. There's so much stuff that has simply not been looked at. And the Sahara is one of those underserved areas as far as I'm concerned. So is the Amazon. 6.7 million square kilometers, about 5.5 still covered by rainforest. It's bigger than India. Here's an article from Nature. 95% of the Amazon has simply not been investigated at all, and those bits that have been investigated are minuscule by comparison. Yet, where investigation is taking place in the Amazon, astonishing finds are being made. And these are in the Brazilian state of Acre, and geoglyphs have been found there. And I've recently been with, not all archaeologists are as opposed to my work as you and your colleagues, Flint. But I've been with...
He didn't seem to be that opposed to me, but maybe it means that there are some archaeologists that are actually... that's an interesting statement that he just made. I hope they give the word back to Mr. Flint, because now he made some very interesting statements. And of course, I agree with the idea of the Sahara being a completely different place when you go back enough time. And but I believe that Mr. Flint agrees with that too. Therefore, I want to see the percentages that have now been discussed. I really hope that Mr. Flint addresses them, because I want to see. If they say two things that are completely different, then we're going to have to do our own research, critical thinking.
Martti Paasinen, who's a leading archaeologist studying the Amazon. I've been with Alceo Ranzi, who's a geographer from Brazil, and with Fabio Davies Filho, who's a LiDAR expert. This is very recently, actually. And we did some LiDAR work in that area. And this is the kind of thing that's being found. Huge, enormous earthworks, geoglyphs, which, were we to find them in the West, we would recognize them as almost as henges. The amount of workmanship that goes into these earthworks is stunning. And they are very precise, very geometrical. You have squares. Here you have a square enclosing a circle. More of the same. Tequino is a gigantic site. These are just scratching the surface. The archaeologists who are working on these sites believe that there are thousands and thousands more of these geoglyph sites, that they're just touching the edge. When I was there with them back in September 23, I think it was, we actually did a bit of LiDAR work. We put up a drone with LiDAR attached, and we found new geoglyphs that had not been found before within a mile of geoglyphs that had been found, but still covered by canopy rainforest. And Martti and Alceo are of the view that if we were to really investigate the whole of the Amazon from this point of view, we would have to revolutionize our whole view of human history. That archaeology has hardly touched this incredibly important region. And therefore, I do not believe that archaeology can tell us that it can rule out any possibility of a lost civilization, while it has so failed to serve the Amazon and is only now beginning to do so. And those who are doing that work are convinced that there's much, much, much more.
Very interesting counter argument. This is when I'm starting to like the positions he's presenting, because the part about how people are attacked, it's I sympathize once again, but I probably just keep it a little shorter. But this is interesting, and I want to see how Mr. Flint. So let's see what Flint says.
To be found, thousands more of these geoglyphs, for example. 27 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface was above water during the Ice Age, and it's underwater today. So yes, there has been quite a bit of marine archaeology. I think Nick Fleming says there's about 3,000 sites have been investigated underwater over the years. But it's, again, you're looking at a tiny fraction of 1% of the submerged areas that have been investigated. I was very excited when I saw this, but it turned out that it was just another search for shipwrecks. And fortunately, some new work is now being done. Archaeologists are beginning to look at the submerged area, Doggerland, for example, between what is now Britain and continental Europe, a submerged landmass. They're beginning to investigate this. It wouldn't surprise me at all if lots of evidence of hunter-gatherers is found in these submerged areas. I would expect that to be the case. But to say that enough work has been done to rule out the possibility of a lost civilization seems to me absurd when we're dealing with 27 million square kilometers. And I just want to say that I and my wife Santha have done a great deal of diving. We did 7 years of scuba diving all over the world. And what we did was we followed up...
That actually sounds so fun.
...local accounts of underwater structures, fishermen, local divers, and we went where they took us. This is Nan Madol, Ponape, on the island of Ponape. You go a bit further underwater and you start finding structures underwater. Go a bit further still and you find this huge column underwater. This is at a depth of 27 meters. That column has been submerged for more than 13,000 years. And it compares very interestingly with this column, if you see on the left, the submerged column at Nam Madol, on the right, this column from Tinian, the island of Tinian, also in that region of the Pacific. I wonder if the megaliths of Tinian have been misdated. What we're looking at here, and I apologize to listeners who are listening and not watching, but what we're looking at here are my fins disappearing into a tunnel. And that tunnel looks to me, this is in Japan, by the way, off the island of Yonaguni. That tunnel looks to me very man-made, particularly when I get inside it and find on each side, two big megaliths piled one on top of the other. And then when you come to the end of the tunnel, you see ahead of you these two massive megalithic blocks.
These are beautiful pictures, by the way.
Directly in view from the tunnel. That's a shot that Santa took of me diving beside those megalithic blocks, just to give you a sense of the scale of them. They're enormous. No, they did not fall from a cliff above. There is no cliff above. And they're in context. We're looking at a huge rocky outcrop with these two megalithic blocks on the side. But let's go round to the right of that rocky outcrop, and we find a rock-hewn area with steps, and those steps...
So he's correct in the sense that it does look artificial. I do want to underline, however, that just because it looks artificial to us, it doesn't prove that it is artificial. There is, in fact, in Japan, in the one of the southern areas in fact, on the east coast of Kyushu, I've been there myself, where there is one area, there is a beach, and it really looks man-made. Lots of steps. It isn't. It's actually natural occurring. Now, I'm not saying that this is natural occurring. I'm just saying that just because it looks man-made, it doesn't mean it is automatically. And you do need to find something else that proves that that's man-made, like anthropomorphic features, for example, or evidence of chiseling or other type of things that don't happen naturally, just to give you context.
Archaeologists tend to argue this is all completely natural. I have done more than 200 dives at Yonaguni. Santa and I risked our lives. We are not dilettantes. We are in this out of conviction. We're in this out of passion for our subject. We've done more than 200 dives at Yonaguni. I've been hands-on with this structure.
Dilettantes would be Italian dilettanti, which means beginners or people that are not professionals, just for clarity.
And all the other structures around it, and I am absolutely confident that we're looking at a rock-hewn structure, a natural rock face that was cut and shaped by human beings. Here,
I'd like to know why you're this confident. I understand 200 dives, and it's very respectable. I appreciate that, but I'd like to know why you're confident that that's artificial.
At Kerema, we're looking at a stone circle underwater. Depth,
that's beautiful.
30 plus meters, 32 meters, I think, been submerged again for more than 13,000 years. There I'm videoing for scale. You can see somebody down beside that central megalith. Flint, do you think nature made that?
I see no evidence of it being man-made, if that's what you're saying.
You see no evidence of that being man-made. You see a central upright. You see uprights surrounding it. You see the outer curve, the inner curve of the outer megalith matching the outer curve of the central megalith, and to you, that's not even interesting?
I mean, even the photos you were showing at Yonaguni showed a lot of natural fractures along straight lines, and so I think that it's really easy to confuse what can happen naturally and geologically with something that looks kind of...
In this case, Flint does have a point. When Hancock asks, you don't find it interesting? No, I think it should be found interesting because there is always the possibility that this was indeed man-made. I think in this case, however, Mr. Flint is discussing things that do. Sometimes it does happen that stuff that occurs naturally appears to be man-made. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Mr. Hancock. Maybe this is man-made, but it isn't a given.
Anthropogenic, but this does not look man-made to me. It does not look like anything I've ever seen.
Well, that's interesting because I took a geologist diving there, Wolf Wichman. He's very skeptical. He was skeptical about Yonaguni, but he did confess after we came up from the dive at Kerema that there's no way, in his opinion, that this could have been made by nature. This is a rock wall off Taiwan. Again, Santa and I went diving there. That's a local diver called Steve Shea. He's showing us this rock wall. We can get in close to it. We can see a sort of pediment in front of it. And if you get up close, you can see that it is actually made of individual blocks put together. Let's go to India, Southeast.
Before he moves forward, also to be fair to Mr. Hancock, of course, it is also possible that the pictures don't convey the sort of experience that they had firsthand. So really, to have a conclusive opinion on it, you would have to possibly go there or maybe see HD video from different angles, close-ups. A couple of pictures like this are not going to be enough for a thorough analysis.
Coast of India. My wife Santha was born in Malaysia, but she's of Tamil South Indian origin. So we had a great advantage in South India in talking to local fishermen and divers because Santha speaks the Tamil language fluently. And we had asked them, are there any structures underwater off here? And they said, you bet there are. There's a whole city underwater off here. And we've complained to the government about it because we keep catching our nets on it and fishermen have to go down and sometimes they die trying to free the nets. We'd like the whole thing cleared away. So we said, would you take us out there and show us? And it took some time to put it together. This was an expedition with the Scientific Exploration Society in Britain that I put together. As you can see, it's a very low-tech expedition. But when we got out there, come on, Flint, tell me these are man-made. Tell me these are natural blocks.
That's a very blurry picture, Graham.
Well, tell me that they're natural blocks. Tell me.
I cannot tell for sure with these photos.
Okay, that's a fair assessment from Mr. Flint. It's a little pushy, Mr. Hancock.
There I'm putting my diving knife between two blocks. And there, and then a curved wall. Actually, the team from the National Institute of Oceanography in India who were with us were intrigued by this.
Do you have any more photos of that are maybe more convincing?
No, that's what I've got. But I'm trying to keep it short.
Right, some of them do have characteristics of stone walls for sure, but it's hard to tell.
That's the top of a stone wall.
Right.
The rest of it's buried in sand on the left there. On the right, a stone wall with a standout feature above it. To suggest that these things are natural seems to me completely absurd. And my point is that if...
No, I don't think neither are absurd. You after examining the place, you could suggest that they are man-made. You could suggest that they are natural, and I think nothing is absurd. You just got to prove it. You got to prove both. So if you want to prove that it's natural, you need to find similar, naturally occurring patterns within the rock that could then give you a strong argument in favor of the idea that this just occurred naturally. For example, the fracture patterns. And then on the other side, if you want to say, no, I really think that this is man-made, then you need to find something else that can demonstrate the anthropogenesis of these elements. So as I was saying, writing, anything that could give us, yes, this is man-made. Because right now, just looking at this picture is not enough. To say any of the two is just interesting for speculation.
Santha and I, with no external funding, the only funding we have, I've never had financial sponsorship from anybody. The only funding that we have is the kind readers who buy my books and allow us to undertake this research. And we've risked our lives for 30 years investigating this research. And if we can find structures of this nature underwater on our very limited basis, then I would imagine that a detailed archaeological survey would find much more. So the submerged continental shelves, the Sahara Desert and the Amazon alone, these are three large underserved areas by archaeology. And I think it's premature for archaeology to say that they can rule out any possibility of a lost civilization.
Okay, well, I think he made a good point here. I kind of disagreed with his approach when it comes to, look at that, it looks man-made. You can't possibly tell me that that's... No, yeah, he can. He absolutely can. And so that part, I thought it was a little weak as a line of argumentation. But the idea that, yes, on the same level, it's kind of similar point, isn't it? Because the idea is, how can archaeology completely dismiss an hypothesis if an Ice Age civilization, if so many areas still are so largely unexplored? So that is a good point.
So-called developed industrial countries, how much of land area of those countries have been investigated?
I mean, so look, I fully agree with you that I'd like to see more archaeology done in ethical, informed ways. I am not trying to argue against searching for sites in the Sahara, the Amazon, or underwater. I think we can hopefully agree that more archaeology needs to be done. I would say in developed countries our coverage is even better, though, mainly due to the fact that laws require archaeological excavation and survey prior to construction. So whenever there's sort of construction going on in cities, there's archaeology happening. Whenever pipelines or highways or things like that are being done, there's survey and there's excavation. And so, I mean, at this point, our numbers of archaeological sites are well in the millions, right? And billions of artifacts that have been found. And so I'm not trying to say it's perfect, though. And at the same time, the kind of excavations that happen sort of on a rescue basis before construction, they're not going to have the same kind of investment that an academic project will have. On the other hand, an academic project is going to make a much smaller hole, because we are focusing on maximizing the evidence that we can get. And so, in no way am I trying to say that archaeology has perfect coverage, but we do have quite a bit of coverage.
Yeah, I don't think we're discussing perfect coverage at this point, but let's see what I don't really think he's trying to say that you've got perfect coverage. I would ditch that term. But let's see how much coverage he thinks archaeology has.
That people are unfamiliar with, and we do have quite a bit of coverage of this late Ice Age period where we have many, many thousands of sites from ephemeral hunter-gatherers, underwater, above water, right, and elsewhere.
As we do above water.
Yeah.
Would you mind showing Yonaguni again? Because those other images aren't nearly as compelling to me as some of the right angles and what looks like passageways and that curved surface underground.
Sure.
That, to me, that's a wild one. See, the other stuff, I'm like, things look weird in nature sometimes, and I'm not an expert. And so I look at that, I'm like, that's blurry, it's green, it's odd. Yeah, it's odd. Maybe if you were there physically, you would have a different impression of it. Maybe it would look more like a stone wall. But Yonaguni, to me, blows me away. This blows me away, but the other image blows me away of the curved front of that feature and what looks like steps to the right of it.
So there's that tunnel.
That's crazy too. That's crazy too because the lines line up. It looks like two blocks were cut and placed on each side, and there seems like a very...
It could also be mental pattern recognition that we have as humans built in. That's why we see faces in coffee. That's why people see Jesus in the coffee foam. I say that as a Christian, by the way. It's not that I don't believe that Jesus exists. I absolutely do. But people do see stuff that isn't there. I doubt that Jesus will appear in the foam of a coffee. So that needs to be taken into consideration. But it does look, I've got to agree, it does look like a man-made tunnel. Is it, though?
Very clear passageway in between them.
Especially since at the end of the passageway you're confronted by this. This is what you look at.
These are crazy. Like, if these are natural formations, they are so bizarre that you have enormous straight lines and right angles that look like they were cut, and not just straight on one side, straight on all sides.
Do you mind going? Yeah, so look at this slide. You can see even to the right of those two blocks, what Graham is calling blocks, you can see these sort of straight angles that are made. You can see a vertical one to the left of them as well.
So how do you think they were placed in that manner?
Well, I don't know if they were placed. I think
so. You think it's possible that they just broke off at some point in history and landed like that?
I think
this is compelling to me.
Yeah, maybe let him answer though, Joe.
But not as compelling as the other one. Show me the other one with the front curved surface. This.
No,
this looks crazy. Like this, the whole thing looks crazy. The steps look crazy. The fact that it's all this one uniform flat line.
Switch to my computer.
I can see why he thinks. Yeah,
some of these look bizarre.
Nature sometimes looks bizarre, though. I mean, I'm assuming that people have investigated this, like geologists and stuff. From what I remember reading,
Professor Masaki Kimura has investigated it, and he's published extensively on it. And he's a geologist. He's absolutely convinced that Yonaguni has been worked extensively by human hands.
And haven't other geologists like Robert Schoch suggested that it's not?
Yeah, I took Robert there. His initial impression was that it was man-made. Later, he changed his view. That's fine. He did 3 dives there.
But I mean, I don't know. I've seen a lot of crazy natural stuff, and I see nothing here that to me reminds me of human architecture, and I've seen human architecture all over the world.
Jamie, go to that one that we were just looking at with Graham. It's lower right, like below the main image to the right-hand side. Yeah, the next one. That one. That one. Yeah.
It's certainly crazy, I'll give you that.
Yeah, it's
I'm not going to deny that. It's an impressive.
How flat that surface is. Very bizarre, and how it juts off and it's flat below it in a uniform line.
It is interesting. Yeah.
The curved surface of the front of it is very bizarre too. That the other image that you had, Graham.
But stone oftentimes fractures in straight ways.
Right.
That's how it fractures naturally.
Yeah, I get it. It's just the appearance of those stones stacked in a uniform manner in that tunnel. All these things, and that this exists somewhere else. It's very similar.
Yeah, these might be renderings of what they think it looks like, I suppose.
I mean, regardless, we still have no dates from this. We have no artifacts.
Well, we do have dates from...
Yeah, it would be nice to have artifacts. Because again, if artifacts are found in it, if you find an amphora, if you find a couple of blades, well, not blades if this is pre-metallurgy, but say, never mind blades, scrap that. But imagine you find, that's the problem though. If you're only working with leather, if you're only working with wood, but then again, wood can conserve underwater, as we discussed. So maybe you will find a wooden artifact in it, and then now the situation is starting to become more interesting, more complex.
From the submergence, you're looking at material that's more than 12,000 years old.
Well, you're looking at stuff that was above land.
This was a tough dive, massive currents there. This is Kerema off Akajima. In the Okinawa group of islands. To me, Flint, it's stunning that you see that as a totally natural thing, but I guess we've just got very different eyes. The central upright surrounded by upright megaliths, all cut out of the bedrock, very similar to the chamber recently excavated at Karahantepe, where you have uprights cut out of the bedrock as well.
It'd be nice to see that one too.
It seems to me inconceivable that nature could have made this, that nature could have separated out this central upright and then created the uprights surrounding it in such a perfect way.
But it's not totally perfect, right? Like, look at the back. The back is much larger.
Yeah,
there's a piece on the side that seems like it's cut out, and then there's a piece in front that seems like it's cut out. But even the one to the lower left is not. It's not cut the same. It's odd that you have that passageway when you're looking down, and it's sort of uniform on all sides.
Yeah, well, just to kind of play devil's advocate in both sides, at the end of the day, it maybe was perfectly cut 12,000 years ago, but this could have been lost for erosion. Maybe it was complete here, if this is man-made. And if it's not man-made on the other side, as he says, nature's and time. Let me see if I can find that thing that I was
the monolith. That's
telling you about in Japan. Let me see. I'll have to remember what it's called. Kyushu Devil Steps, was it? Oh, yeah, I found it. Oh, my gosh, that was lucky. There we go. So this is what it's called, the Devil's Washboard. And it's quite impressive. I've been there, of course, physically, myself. And if you look at all of these, everything, like look at the patterns. This is all naturally occurring. This is all natural. Look at the steps. You can see them here. It's impressive. Of course, it's not as cut and perpendicular and straight as you would imagine, as that was impressing, both of them. But it's still quite impressive that something like this would occur absolutely naturally. And I've been there, walked all around it, and in person is in fact more impressive, even more impressive. This is all natural. There you go, from a distance. Very, very beautiful place, by the way, with all the breakage. Yeah, it does look more natural, though, than those others. But yeah, there are places that are impressive. This is one of those. Just in picture, it doesn't really give as much of a feel as it did when I was there. And it did really look like someone did this, like the steps. But the steps were absolutely natural. Anyways, this was fascinating so far. We did about an hour, so I'm going to stop it here for episode 1. If you like this, though, because up to this point we heard both introductory statements, then they disagreed a little bit, well, quite a bit, in fact, on a few things. We had some back and forth, some interesting commentary added by Joe Rogan. We saw some interesting pictures, some imagery. Be interesting to continue this. Be nice to continue this. If you like it, absolutely, please let me know in the comments. Share it, like it, and then we could do an episode 2 where we do the next dive hour and see if we can come to a resolution, at least to some of the points, if we can find agreement. But up to this point, I have to say I'm very much liking this discussion. In fact, they are both behaving much better than some of the fans and haters on both sides of this discussion. So I appreciate that. I wanted just to say that. Of course, do make sure you click the link in the description below to take advantage of the amazing offer by Factor. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow for my next daily upload. Goodbye.